Welcome to Living Through History, where we embark on a captivating journey through the events, people and stories that have shaped the world in the 20th and 21st centuries. Join us as we unravel the intricate tapestry of modern history, exploring pivotal moments, cultural shifts, political revolutions, and technological breakthroughs that have defined our contemporary world. In this episode, the dark side of Mother Teresa of Calcutta. We practically know everything about Mother Teresa of Calcutta, or perhaps almost everything. Her childhood in Macedonia, the transition to the religious order, her novitiate experience in Ireland, and the lengthy eternal experience in India. We know it all. A land that had fascinated her since she was a girl, reading the letters of missionaries sent to the Indian subcontinent in the early 20th century to evangelize the population, including Mother Teresa of Calcutta. As we've mentioned, we know almost everything. We know about her sufferings, her closeness to the last derelicts, the sick and the needy. We also know that the Catholic Church, through a very swift procedure, canonized her and declared her a saint. In short, a figure absolutely to be considered in a positive light. Let's also include the Nobel Peace Prize awarded to her. But an old proverb says that all that glitters is not gold. And even in the case of Mother Teresa of Calcutta, we find a few things, some stains, some doubts, some insinuations that deserve to be explored. Something in the details that doesn't quite fit into the entire reconstruction of beatification and sanctification. Something that clashes with Christian and Catholic morality as much as with what we all perceive as morality, regardless of religious belief. Those principles that should be universal and essentially guide or should guide human beings throughout their existence. As we said, all that glitters is not gold, and the first to think so is a journalist. His name is Christopher Hitchens in 1995, when Mother Teresa is still alive, albeit suffering from malaria. He writes a book with a provocative title in Italian rendered as The Position of the Missionary. Yes, I know. Some of you may think it's a blasphemous title. Unfortunately, it's not my title, and I can't do anything about it. This book causes scandal, not exclusively because of that provocative title, but for the investigations carried out by ISIS regarding the activities of Mother Teresa of Calcutta. What does Hitchens write in his book? That the future saint considered poverty, illness, and suffering as gifts from heaven. She told the most unfortunate people, the sick, the poor, and the destitute, to joyfully accept these as gifts from God. Now, if Catholic Christian morality has taught anything, it is that yes, there is, at least according to them, divine judgment. There is, for certain interpretations, a predestination that has been further explored by other Christian doctrines, such as Lutheran and Calvinist ones. But Catholic morality teaches me to passively accept everything that comes without giving a message, without showing to God that we are worthy or unworthy of what comes as a gift. Just read the scriptures, just read, for example, the Pope, but let's get back to us. Let's leave aside for the moment what the ecclesiastical doctrine is. Hitchens in his book justifies this statement, the praises that Mother Teresa sang to pain and poverty, with observations made on site. Let's take Calcutta, the great Indian metropolis that gave its name to the future saint. In Calcutta, Mother Teresa had established a clinic, later turned into a small hospital, a small clinic dedicated to the last among the last. Certainly a commendable gesture, undoubtedly an act that earned her rightful praise from the international community. But what exactly is that clinic? Hitchens tells us about the famous Calcutta Clinic. In reality, it is not a hospital. Inside, there is no care. It's just a shelter, a poorly maintained hospice, a place where the poor go to die instead of dying on the streets, amidst hardship and filth. They go to die within the dilapidated walls of Mother Teresa's clinic, which is not a clinic, as medical care is scarce, primitive, and with limited resources, with personnel that is not trained or qualified for medical care. In the vast majority, it is religious individuals who do not have medical experience and do not even have the necessary university education. This is what Hitchens exposes in his book. He reveals that behind the image of Mother Teresa and her closeness to the last, there is no intention to improve the living conditions of these unfortunate individuals. Instead, there is a mere glorification of their suffering and martyrdom, an extreme portrayal of human suffering before the eyes of the world, but without any effort to alleviate it. Hitchens is not alone in his book, as he is supported by various international medical associations. Two British journals, The Lancet and the British Medical Journal, during the same period, also report on the poor living conditions of the patients. The fact that in the famous clinic, which is not really a clinic, beyond the beds and a few medicine cabinets, there is no trace of proper hospital equipment is exposed by the British Medical Journal. The absence of specialists and real doctors is highlighted. In that place, only shelter is provided, palliatives are given. Sometimes a few over-the-counter drugs are administered, ones that anyone can obtain without a prescription. So, it's not a hospital, it's not a clinic. How can we define it but as deception, a distortion of reality? And why did Mother Teresa of Calcutta, who appeared so close to the last, not want to heal them, but wanted them to suffer even more, as if it were an exaltation of a supposed divine will? Perhaps for this reason we need to go back very, very far. We need to go back to 1946. India has just gained independence. With it, Pakistan becomes independent too, as the two entities separate due to one being mostly Hindu and the other mostly Muslim, and religious clashes become increasingly intense. Calcutta, for several weeks, is shaken by continuous turmoil. There are killings everywhere. It is referred to as the Great Calcutta Killing. Mother Teresa stays secluded in her monastery for a long time. She only comes out occasionally to seek food. After a few weeks, when the turmoil begins to subside, thanks also to the intervention of Mahatma Gandhi, the religious, like Mother Teresa, come out. Mother Teresa herself goes to Darjeeling for a spiritual retreat, and during this journey, she claims to have had a mystical illumination, a revelation. In this revelation, Mother Teresa supposedly understood that the true divine message would be suffering. To suffer even more, she who had already taken vows, who was already engaged in missionary activities. From that moment onward, she dedicates her life to poverty, illness, insecurity, tragedy, and suffering, taking care of the destitute, the homeless, the sick, and the lepers. This is how we know Mother Teresa. This is how the West knows Mother Teresa of Calcutta. Well, from that moment onward, she becomes a public media figure, photographed alongside powerful figures. From that moment onward, Mother Teresa's life changes, but from that moment onward, questions also arise. One of them concerns, as we mentioned, the non-clinical clinic in Calcutta. Then there are other questions. One of them is raised by a German magazine that, a few years after the religious leader's death, publishes a dossier posing an uncomfortable question. Where did the money go? Because yes, the order founded by Mother Teresa was based on poverty and humility, but around the world, many people had donated sums to that order to help the poor in Calcutta and beyond. But that money has disappeared. Why are the order's structures so dilapidated, so frightening in their extreme poverty, when a rain of millions of dollars has poured into India from all over the world? Where did that money go? No one can give an answer to this question, and this is perhaps an even heavier stain. Because, on the one hand, we can understand, even if we don't accept Mother Teresa of Calcutta's vision of maximizing suffering and pain, but on the other hand, money disappearing in any context, be it financial, social, economic, military, or religious, is never a good sign, especially when no answers are provided. The only response that comes is from Mother Teresa's hagiographers, who reject the accusations and instead invite critics to provide evidence. In response, critics argue that essentially the only proof is that those funds are no longer there, and they would like an answer themselves, knowing where they went. Because if they arrived, it would be necessary to understand how they were used, and if they didn't arrive, it would be necessary to understand why so many people who publicly supported fundraising did not physically deliver those funds. In short, understanding what happened is another question regarding the money. Follow the money, say the English. Following the money leads to some, let's call them curious characters, to say the least. One of these is named Charles Kidding, and is known to the chronicles because he was convicted of fraud. He had set up complex financial mechanisms to defraud subscribers, and part of the proceeds from his fraud ended up with the religious congregation of the Missionaries of Charity, the order founded by Mother Teresa of Calcutta. Then there is another character we've already encountered in one of our videos, named Jean-Claude Duvalier, but the world knows him as Baby Doc. Have you already guessed who we're talking about? The son of Papa Doc, from the brutal and bloodthirsty dynasty of Haiti. Jean-Claude Duvalier donates substantial sums to the cause of Mother Teresa of Calcutta. For those who wonder, it remains a strange mystery why, indeed, a dictator who starves his own people decides to donate millions and millions of dollars to charity. Yet he does it. Mother Teresa of Calcutta, in her lifetime, never answered the few, albeit significant, questions about her political friendships. Certainly, to raise funds, sometimes you have to make deals even with the devil. And if the devil of the Duvalier is a decidedly recognizable devil, it is clear that the end justifies the means, as Machiavelli wrote. And then perhaps we could also say that if the goal is to help the neediest, sometimes one can bend to the contingencies of history, pretending not to know the personal background of certain dictators. But what happened to that money? And why did Mother Teresa never reject the help that came from certain ambiguous or questionable figures? These are answers that we cannot obtain. After all, Mother Teresa has been dead for a long time. It has been 26 years, and her order remains silent in the face of certain questions. There is one last stain on Mother Teresa's resume, a stain that we could describe as mystical, or, in any case, strictly religious. In the year 2007, 10 years after her death, another book is released titled Yes, My Light. It's not an investigation, but a collection of 60 letters from Mother Teresa. In these letters addressed to her confessors, Mother Teresa expressed strong doubts about her personal faith, and these doubts are very, very heavy. In each of these she writes, "There is a terrible darkness within me, as if everything is dead. And it has been more or less like this since I began my work." In another letter she writes, "I murmur the prayers of the community. I strive to draw sweetness from every little word it should offer, but the prayer of union no longer exists. I no longer pray." In these letters she defines Christ as the absent one, with a capital A, the one who is always silent. This book is unsettling because a person raised to the altars so recently for meritorious works in life expressed herself regarding her faith in such harsh and critical terms. Well, something that shakes the foundations of any religious belief, let alone the Catholic one. Yet, all this has not shaken the granite certainty of many believers who still today venerate Mother Teresa of Calcutta as an immaculate saint. Others, however, continue to wonder who Mother Teresa of Calcutta really was. Some Canadian scholars have developed a theory that the impact of the media world, including as journalists, cameramen, and even simply the travels made by the saint abroad, has contributed to the creation of a myth, an untouchable, intangible myth of Mother Teresa, a myth that bypasses the reality that surrounds her and covers all the various shadows, all the various dark points of her personal story and her order. It covers her doubts about faith, her hesitations, her excessive exaltation of pain, the issue of the disappeared money, and her uncomfortable political friendships. In the face of all these objections, the Catholic Church has never shown signs of yielding. Certainly, it could not do so. It would mean reconsidering the dogma of sanctity. However, allow us an observation: humans by nature are fallible, and to define a human being as holy, that is, close to divinity, is what the ancient Greeks called hubris, religious arrogance, the desire to compare oneself, that is, human beings, to divinity itself. According to ancient Greek morality, one guilty of hubris was condemned to suffer a terrible penalty, almost as retribution, because one cannot approach the divine while remaining imperfect. Mother Teresa of Calcutta was a woman who had courage in what she did, in what she said, in what she wrote, even in her contradictions, and for this, she deserves respect. But if you allow us an objection, questions should not be answered with silence or disdain. Certain questions should be given an answer, because the more time passes, The more these questions accumulate, the fewer answers are obtained, the more silence there is, and the more doubts grow. Doubts about who Mother Teresa of Calcutta really was and what the true purposes were, both hers and those who collaborated with her and supported her.